I'm speaking to Ravi Navaratnam, Executive Director of Sage 3. And Ravi, you had a report, Rethinking Economics, and one question I have is can Malaysia actually break out of this middle income trap and emerge as a tiger potentially in the Asian economy? Because that's kind of the question that seems to be sprouting out from your report.
All right, okay. First thing is maybe let's just answer a little bit what this middle income trap's about.
Yes,
yeah?
Explain what that is.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that the World Bank did study some time ago and actually found that most countries will remain either poor, in the middle, or wealthy. And that's really measured as a percentage of the United States wealth, right? And that's an important concept because as we get richer, so does the developed countries. So it's a relative measure,
Correct.
right? And so how many companies can actually escape that? And quite a few countries, some of them very small countries and very unique in nature, perhaps Singapore's one as a good example of that. But then there are also some sizable countries in East Asia which have got out of it, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and certainly some countries in Europe as well, which were not very wealthy previously, but today are amongst the wealthier countries, Spain and so forth. Yeah, Spain, Ireland, and though they went through the global financial crisis, they've come up wealthy again. So how do you actually break it out, get out of that? In an answer, we think Malaysia can. And why do we say that? If you actually look at the path to prosperity, and there's some very good work from Harvard University and around the work around Atlas of Economic Complexity, and you actually look at the countries that have been doing well over the last 10 years in increasing economic complexity, one of them is Malaysia. And the expectation is Malaysia will also increase its economic complexity. Economic complexity is directly correlated to income growth. So the higher your economic complexity, the better your chance.
And economic complexity is the complexity of your product, services, and
your
market.
Your ability of your industries to actually make complex products and services. And we certainly have been good at it. And if you look at it, we've been good at electronics. We've also gone a little bit into the automotive sectors. We've got an oil and gas and so on. So we're actually beginning to see a lot more manufacturing, more complex services, and we are moving along in the right direction. So actually that's one of the things that tells us, looking at that index, we can do well. The other thing that's very important for us is that the role of government. If you actually think about the role of government, which then is willing to take on things that the private sector cannot do and actually help us move to more complex industries, yeah, and take on radical risk. That means risk that, the technology is difficult, the market's difficult. Businessmen don't want to take that risk.
Yes,
That's one of the things they could do. The other thing is, I think the government can think about is credit guidance. I know this has been a bad word since the Asian crisis, but again, we need to look at it as, let's think about it and think.
And what's credit guidance?
Credit guidance is actually telling the financial system where to direct credit. One of the issues that we have in a lot of economies now is that because it's been laissez-faire since the late 80s and, with the Big Bang in London and so on, it's been laissez-faire. So if you leave bankers on their own, what would they do? They would go for least risk, highest reward.
Yeah.
And where was that? Property sector.
Yeah.
So what happened is you got asset inflation
and
less money going to working capital or plant and equipment, which means wages and salaries don't go up.
Or new technology.
And wages and salaries don't go up. So what happens is the rich get richer because they own the assets, and the poor don't get higher salaries, and you get greater income disparity. And there's a lot of good studies in that. And what we are actually advocating here is, let's put these ideas down. I mean, we're not saying we're right or wrong. What we're saying is, let's put these ideas around, let's calmly debate them, and let's use our collective knowledge to come up with the policies that work for Malaysia. And there's nothing here which says that we can't do it. We've done it before. We've transformed the economy in the late 80s. We've transformed the economies. We went into a bad Asian financial crisis in '97. We came out better than any other country. It's still the World Bank or even IMF, which first were critical of our unorthodox approach. They say we are probably one of the best approaches were taken to sort out a banking crisis. So we've done this before. But what's happened is that in the past, we've done these transformations of the economy, and then we've slipped back, and the excesses start again. What's different this time? This time we can anchor the change with institutional reform, and that's happening. So whatever changes and we reform the economy this time, it's actually anchored with institutional reform. And I'll give you a good example of this.
Sure.
If you look at in 2000, one of the countries that reformed the economy, just like Malaysia, was Turkey. Yeah, and they were reforming the economy because they were thinking about ascension to the European Union, right? And for whatever reasons, they didn't go. Whereas a lot of Eastern European countries, yes, corruption, etc., are problems in Eastern Europe, but because of the framework brought by the EU, a lot of the corruption or etc. cannot reoccur in those countries because of the wider controls of the EU. The institutional reforms are anchored. What happened in Turkey, they've gone back, and if you look at it, Turkey's gone into a financial, a currency crisis in the last 2 years. And because a lot of things got rolled back. What we're saying is, this time, if we make the institutional reforms and couple it with the economic transformation, it's here to stay.
But those reforms, especially the institutional, needs to be sustainable ones, right?
Yeah.
And so how, I mean, what are a couple of key things that as the public we need to be thinking about or doing, or what kind of discourse should we be having about these things?
I think I'm not an expert on institutional reform, but
just in general.
I think where it comes from is, for a country to do well, it needs at the pyramid, everything needs to work well, right? And that's, your trade policies, your judiciary, your integrity.
So that's being slowly revamped.
That's being revamped,
right?
Okay, but that's what I will say. Necessary but not sufficient conditions.
Okay.
The next is the role of government, right? Then the next tier will be the role of government. And this is where we say we can take a more radical thinking of how government don't just depend when
and also do the guided.
Well, these are all part of what we call the activist or interventionist government. Yeah, and that's not totally new in Malaysia. We've done this before. I mean, you look at the growth of rubber or even palm oil in Malaysia, very much government-driven initiatives which have been successful. Some less successful, some successful. We talk where they've been successful and where they haven't in our report in more detail. And then the final thing is, the role of the firm, the role of the banks, and the role of employees, and then how do you distribute the wealth. And don't go to the models where a lot of the wealth ends up in the banks, and wages are skewed. So these, I think, are possible that once we got more complex industries which can produce products and services, we get our people who have more productive knowledge. Really no reason why we can't get back to the high growth. We've had high growths twice. Actually, I looked back and people forget, even in the early 70s we had very, very high growth. It's not just the 90s. We actually, even after troublesome, very dark period in our history after May 13, we actually had very high growth in the early 70s, right? So, and we had high growth again in the 90s. There's no reason why we can't see high growth going forward and getting out of this middle income.
So my final question, as a layperson, some of us don't have influence in the government to drive some of these changes.
Yeah.
But what can we do to enable the economy to become a little bit more complex, in terms of our own, what should we be thinking about? I mean, a lot of parents say, to educate their children, educate, but we've talked about education not being an answer or magic pill. What else should we be thinking?
I think education is important. Let's not get that wrong. Education is very important. But it's not really productive knowledge. But education itself, I see, is important because it teaches values. So it teaches people to have sense of hard work, the right values, integrity and all. So the education system plays an important role of building the base population with basic knowledge on English, maths, languages,
science,
and so on. But then you got to get it to the next level of product. So you can't just start from zero and then get even to that product. So that base needs to be it. But a lot of the training can happen still in the workspace, which we think, because sometimes to sort out education is political, it's difficult for countries to do. So if we can certainly sort it in the workplace. It should not be a factor that inhibits us to getting wealthier. That's one thing. But you asked the question, what can lay people do? One of the things we are trying to do is we're saying, let's get this debate far more on the top of the national agenda. Get it on the national agenda. What are we doing? Are we getting to this path to prosperity? Are we doing the right things? Some of the ideas might be right. Some of them might be wrong, what we are proposing. But let's debate. Let's have the discourse.
And that discourse is important.
Yeah.
And it's also awareness and education for all of us.
Absolutely. So, and one of the things that if you talk about economics, it's not about centrally planned economics, right? We know those don't work. It's about thousands of managers, doing their own thing. And then,
the aggregation of that.
And then it's an amalgamation of that which works well. I think somebody said, our prosperity has got to do with human action, but not human design. So that's what Adam Smith said. And that's a lot of the thinking is that we say it cannot be planned centrally and willed by the government, but can the government do things to make it happen?
Yeah.
But where it really needs to happen and you want to do certain things which are very different, then we also talk about mobilization. And the governments can mobilize and solve certain problems, and they need to make those kind of distinctions. But I hope that, you know, the policymakers will, perhaps they're thinking about it. We don't have an absolute sense of it, but at least they will start, you know, as these debates take place and people participate, then hopefully the right policies come out that can take us out of this middle income trap.
Very good, Ravi. Thank you. Appreciate your time here.
Thanks.